if you can make the right decision more often than the wrong decision, like you're choosing between virtue and vice, the easy way, the hard way. I think if you make that choice often enough, it adds up. You're not going to be perfect, but you're going to be at least heading in the right direction.
I was supposed to be here in one of those seats there with my wife. We had bought tickets for the show tonight, and a couple hours ago, Ryan texted me and said, "Yeah, Robert's not. He's not able to come. What? So, do you want to continue the story?"
Yeah, Robert was not able to come. He very much wanted to be here, and I think he would be here at the expense of his health if I allowed it, which I did not. I'm very protective of Robert, and I was texting you about maybe having dinner before the show, and I said, change of plans. What if you just came on stage instead? And your wife was quite understanding and allowed me to steal her date away, so I very much appreciate it. But I feel like this has been my life recently, which has actually been a good Stoic lesson, which is just like, how do you accept things that are totally outside of your control? And how can you do it with as little frustration and stress and tension as possible? Why do you need to add that on top?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that comes naturally to me, but it is something that I am working on.
And there's actually a book about this called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and it's great because the obstacle has been the way tonight, and here we are, and it's actually such an honor to be here. And I've been on the stage several times before for How I Built This events, and I'm a big fan of Ryan's, and I'm a big fan of all of your work, and as you know.
Thank you.
I want to start by sort of talking to you about this moment that we're in. What would Stoicism tell us about how to deal with a circumstance like this?
Yeah, I read this great thing by David Brooks several years ago. He was talking about this piece of advice he got when he had kids. So his son was born, and a friend emailed him, and they said, "Welcome to undeniable reality." And what he meant was that, when you have kids, you come face to face with how little control you have over things, right? You're supposed to get somewhere at 2 p.m., you're driving there, and your kid falls asleep at 1:55, and you're no longer in control of what time you arrive because you're not insane. You're not gonna wake a kid prematurely up from a nap. And you just realize you had these illusions about your control over the world and your environment and your place in it. It forces you to come face to face with this idea of acceptance. The Stoics call it the art of acquiescence. And as I was talking to Robert before, I said, I think this is actually an opportunity for us to practice this. We can sort of rage against this. We can pretend otherwise. We can force this thing, or we can accept the overwhelming evidence and feedback and facts that we've gotten from the world about this, which is that you are not well enough to do this. It wouldn't be fair to the audience to do it this way. There would be you can always make things worse, right? And so, you might be able to get the thing that, people are saying isn't going to work, but you're going to pay for it many times over down the road, right? And I think anyone who is successful or driven or talented, you're all of that is rooted in your unwillingness to take no for an answer, right? You do the things that people say are impossible, that are unlikely, that you can't pull off. And maybe even you do that to yourself, right? Like you doubt that you can do something, you're scared, you push through. And so you develop this sort of tool, this hammer that sees the nail of no or unlikely or impossible, and you hammer it down every time. And then it's wonderful, it gets you ahead. But everything starts to look like that nail, right? And a lot of things are not that nail. When people are telling you something's a bad idea, sometimes they're not haters. Sometimes they're telling you that is a cliff.
Yeah.
And lots of people have gone over that.
It comes from a place of love.
Yes. And sometimes your body is coming to you from that place of love. Like, I know you want to go for a run today, but your knee, me as your knee is telling you, I don't have it in me. And, unless you want to get surgery, don't do it. And so the ability to have the restraint or the check on the impulse to not hit that nail is, I think, a very underrated skill. And it's something I've been trying to work on more in my life. Just, someone says, "Hey, I can't do it." And you go, "Okay, being able to accept, it's not resignation, but it is kind of a flexibility that's very different than the rigidity or the aggression or the offensive nature that I think serves us so well until it doesn't serve us well."
We're going to talk about, or I think we're going to come back to this theme a few times tonight, which is the lessons from your books and sort of the kind of the underlying principles. And it's funny because I think probably a lot of people in this room can relate to this. I'll watch your videos or I will read your books and I will think, gosh, how can I be more like Ryan Holiday? Like, how can I live like that, right? But I have to think, Ryan, that you are also struggling to live up to those principles because it's hard. It's hard work to practice the things that you write about and the things that you admire about the ancients that you write about.
Well, if Robert was here and we were flipping this question, we were asking him about these laws of power, he would not sit here and say, "Well, I'm an expert in all of them, and I wrote this book from a position of superiority."
Or my own experiences.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes one a student of a thing is your fascination with it, but also your desire to get better at that thing. And so my wife likes to joke that one of us is a Stoic and the other writes about Stoicism, which there are certainly moments where I would agree to that, or I would have to cop to that. So I feel like each one of the books that I've written, and certainly the things I talk about from Stoicism, are almost always from the position of I am trying to understand a thing that I would like to be better at, and I am talking about it from the perspective of someone who's trying to get better at it, as opposed to the perspective of someone who has perfected it.
It's like a North Star, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's a way to keep myself accountable. I mean, like if you I would not recommend writing a book called The Obstacle is the Way, a book called Ego is the Enemy, a book called Stillness is the Key, a book called Courage is Calling, Discipline is Destiny, because then people expect you to be all those things, which is, of course, impossible. But the benefit of sort of signing my name to these like impossible sort of epigrams or ideas is that there are moments where I catch myself and I go, the person who wrote this book cannot possibly allow themselves to get away with doing whatever you're thinking of doing. That's helpful. There's a sort of accountability, I think, in talking about the ideas.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's kind of dig down a bit on this notion of ego, right? Because we all have a version of that, right? And so,
Sure.
right, and or versions of it, and for some it's more extreme than it is for others, but and you do too, like anybody. I mean, you obviously have had success and have success, and people come to your bookstore in Bastrop, Texas, to come meet you, and so, there's this. I'm sort of gonna butcher it, but there's this notion from Thich Nhat Hanh, which is that we all have these seeds within us of jealousy, anger, ego, whatever it is, but also joy and love and kindness, and so it's our responsibility to decide what we are going to plant and sow, right? And so when you find yourself in a situation where your mind is going to that negative space, how do you how do you sort of pull yourself back? I mean, are you literally going to your books and thinking, okay, focus on humility, self-awareness, I need to articulate a purpose?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think is interesting about Stoicism and Buddhism as philosophies is they're not this like, you have this epiphany and then you're just that thing, right? Enlightenment is not this state that you reach. It's this thing that you are
Constantly,
trying to do.
yeah.
And when you think about what Marcus Aurelius' Meditations is as a work of literature, it was never intended to be published. The Greek title of Meditations is To Himself. And we don't even know how long a time span it was written over, or or what it even looked like what order it was in. And so what I make up for meditations is this ongoing conversation this guy's having with himself. And that's why it repeats itself a lot, is that he's having, as we all do, the same conversations with himself. Different situations, it's in a different tenor at different places in your life and at different ages, but that he's having this ongoing thing. And for Marcus, it's about his temper, it's about talk about ego. He's the most powerful man in the world. And he's like trying to remind himself, like, you can't enjoy your posthumous fame and that, none of this means anything. And so, I feel like I'm having conversations with myself, both privately, like in my own journals, but then also through my work. So each one of the themes I'm picking is something that I'm really going through. So The Ego is the Enemy, for instance, was basically my first book after a really successful book. And I was thinking about, how do you not become like the other people who have been in the position that you are currently in? And so I feel like what I'm working on is, I like how you put that you have these seeds inside of you, or that there, in every situation there's this way to go or that way to go, and understanding that you don't make that choice once, but you make it over and over again every day in the course of your life. And if you can make the right decision more often than the wrong decision, like if you can go humility versus ego, if you can go kindness versus selfishness, hard work versus the easy way. For the Stoics, this is called the choice of Hercules. Comes to this crossroads in his life. And, if you can you're choosing between virtue and vice, the easy way, the hard way. I think if you make that choice often enough, it adds up. You're not going to be perfect, but you're going to be at least heading in the right direction. And that's kind of how I think about it.
Some people are just wired to handle crisis and conflict better than others, right?
Sure.
Which I think is why the lessons from the Stoics are particularly useful for people like me, who
are not.
And the reason why I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh and the seeds is that earlier today I was being extremely negative about just a variety of irritating things that happened, and my wife said, we all have these seeds that are planted within us, and you can choose which one you want to water, and so it really did make me think about reframing. But we're all constantly distracted by things that are happening around us in real time.
Sure.
The news, today there's a bank that fails, or a political situation, or a tweet from a politician, or something. And most of us are consumers of contemporaneous information. Yeah. And so how would the Stoics kind of, advise us to navigate that? I mean, would they say just shut it out and close yourself off to that contemporaneous information? Or would they say, well, no, you can expose yourself to it, but here's how you manage it. Here's how you manage the anxiety.
Well, it's funny to think that in the ancient world, there is this exact debate. And this is the debate between the Epicureans and the Stoics. The Epicureans retreat to Epicurus's garden, which sounds very lovely, has a little sign on it. It says, stranger, you would do well to tarry here. And this is where it's not this sort of hedonistic pleasure palace, but it's quiet and beautiful, and there's things to drink and things to eat, and all your friends are there. And it was a escape or a retreat from the world, which was awful, right? It was dusty and violent, and all the things that are unpleasant about today's world, stupid people and selfish people, and all that stuff was there, right? And if you've ever been to a monastery or someone's gorgeous estate, you're like, this is what I should do. And the Stoics though said, like, but somebody has to be involved, someone has to make tough decisions, someone has to do the work, someone has to know what's going on. And the distinction the Stoics said was, are you someone who only gets involved when you have to, or are you someone who gets involved unless something prevents you? And the Stoics said, like, no, you get involved. That's your duty as a person. Because if you don't do it, you're ceding the field to someone or something else, and probably worse. And yet, one still deserves peace and quiet and contemplation. And so I think the Stoic idea is like, how do you build that garden or that beautiful retreat inside oneself? And that's the tougher way to do it. I think there's a balance, right? I don't live in Manhattan. I live in Texas. That was a choice for me. It was a busier, quieter way to live, but I don't live in a bubble either, right? So I think you try to find a balance. I think in today's world, like in a democracy, we have an obligation to be informed citizens who participate. I think the problem is maybe how we have come to define what being informed is and what participation is, right? Is being informed following every tweet? Is being informed knowing every current event as it unfolds? Is participating getting in arguments on Facebook or Nextdoor or something? Or is it voting or, you know, running for office oneself or just, sweeping your side of the street, right? And so I think how we define what being informed is and how we define or what we decide to contribute, to me, that's the critical question. Because I think a lot of people feel like they're participating, but they're just kind of shouting into the void or they're torturing themselves and the people around them in the process. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a daily struggle, right? I mean, I am in a profession where I have to consume information because I
Sure.
need to use it to interview people and also to relate to their stories. But it's hard. I mean, there are certainly moments when I just want to shut it out. And one of the things that I did for a while was I stopped reading the daily newspapers.
Yeah.
And it was hard, but I didn't do it. And then every 2 weeks, I would read like a publication that would summarize the news or would contextualize it, like the New York Review of Books. I'd like read it, and there'd be like a big, 5,000 word piece about something that happened like 4 months earlier, and it's just less anxiety driven, right? But I do lack that discipline. I mean, I do get sucked into that vortex of daily news, of daily things happening. I mean, even today, you think about like this bank that's collapsing, and I'm sure people in this room probably are thinking of some of those things.
But don't you think that the trouble too is like there's being informed and then there's being informed as a story is happening, right? And I understand if you're a Wall Street trader or you're a politician or you're the mayor of a city or something, you need some real-time information. But I think the problem is when we're following stories as they develop, because the Stoics actually talk about this, which is this idea of like when you are wondering all the things that could happen, when you're suffering in advance of those things happening, you're losing not just the present moment, but you're actually making yourself less prepared for that thing, right? And so I think realizing like the story is going to shake itself out, right? Like you following it in real time, you're not really making decisions on this information. What you're doing is speculating, gambling even on it's like sports, obviously at the end, there's going to be the end of the game and someone's going to win or lose. The entertainment, the joy is watching that happen. But the news or current events, it's the exact opposite, right? Like there's going to be a victor at the end of the election. Speculating as it goes and watching the horse race of it all and the changing of the lead and the latest poll, like what are you doing with this information? You're not doing anything with this information except giving up time that you could have spent on other things. And then I think most of the time making yourself miserable before. I'm not saying that the outcome is going to be positive, right? Like it could be the person that you don't want to win wins, or it could be that it shakes out that this financial event is 500 times worse than you would like it to be. But feeling shitty day to day as it's happening is needless suffering and self-inflicted suffering on top of it. And so, you don't just like close your ears and pretend it's all going to be fine. But I do think you go, well, what is What can I be working on? What can I be doing? Maybe there actually is some way you can affect the outcome of
Yeah.
that thing, but that would be a better use of one's time.
Ryan, I know you've talked about this in the past, but I still think it's a really, really fascinating story because, of course, there's been a resurgence in popularity in Stoicism, I think, largely due to your work. And I don't know if some of you may have read an article in the New York Review of Books that came out about a year ago, and it was by a very, very distinguished academic, and it was a review of books about the ancients, including Ryan's work, and it was extremely complimentary of your work, and you write work for popular audiences, so he could have really trashed it, right? And yet it was written with a lot of respect for what you do. I wonder what you attribute, though, this kind of resurgence and interest. And so you yourself kind of just stumbled on meditations, I think, in college, right?
Yes, I did. I did. It was a total accident. I bet you get that when you talk to people, especially for how I built this, they had some idea that something could be true or work, and then it becomes true. And I think there's two ways that one reacts to that, which is you go, wow, or you go, I fucking knew it the whole time. I'm a genius, right? And I had some sense that Stoicism could be popular. I mean, I wouldn't have written a book about it if I thought it would sell 0 copies. But, when I went to my publisher and I said, I want to write a book about an obscure school of ancient philosophy, they were not like, how much can we pay you? They were like, what's the least amount we could pay you? And then I said, that sounds good, because that's also kind of what I thought it was worth. You know what I mean? Like I didn't feel like I was getting robbed when I took like less than half for The Obstacles Away as I'd gotten for Trust Me I'm Lying. I thought that sounds really like I'm writing a book about an obscure school of ancient philosophy. So I had this sense that it could resonate outside the world that it was currently constrained to, which is like people who are interested in ancient history or philosophy. But if you notice, like obstacle and ego are both in the business category.
Yes.
And I thought I could take ancient philosophy and make it relevant in business in the way that in the 90s and early 2000s, like Machiavelli and Sun Tzu had been made popular to business audiences. So I was like, that's the world I'm in. The Stoics have helped me as in my marketing life and just corporate life. And so that was about what I saw. And then it turned out it was military and sports and finance and all these other domains that it was relevant into. But that was not at all, I wouldn't say that's not my intention, but that's not a thing I thought would be true. And I do think it's important, as one turns out to be right about things, that you rein, like that you only give yourself credit for what you were actually sure, or what, like when you accidentally discover things, you should remember, well, my hypothesis was X, because if you want ego to not creep in, you got to make sure you're not giving yourself credit. I'm sure, do you see that with the entrepreneurs that you talk to, where like it can either inflate you or it can kind of humble you?
No question about it. I mean, I think that's a kind of recurring theme around founding a business and taking a risk. I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot is the notion of fear, right? And I know you've written about this in your book on courage, and fear is a big part of that book. How we assimilate fear and how we allow it to help us, because fear, I mean, right? Fear is, well, it's terrifying to be fearful. It's not fun.
Yeah.
It's super unfun. And yet it's, as you write, a necessary part of doing something courageous.
Yeah. And I think if you're like, okay, I have this idea and I think it could work out. Here's what the potential downsides are, but here's the potential upsides. And then it does work out, or it works out better than you thought. The real lesson to take from that is not like I'm a genius. I saw 500 feet in, 5 miles into the future that other people didn't. But you're like, I was interested in this thing. I, saw what the downsides were. I was confident in the upsides. I took this risk to work out. That's a better lesson to take than you're a genius or you have Midas touch, because one is much more replicable than the other. And to go, okay, well, next I'm interested in this, and I'm going to try that sort of smaller, more iterative thing over and over again. And I think with Stoicism, I was personally interested in it. It had a lot of relevance to me personally, and I thought, how can I bring this to people in a way that is accessible and practical, and also combines what I like. Like, Robert's not here, but I would think what Robert has done with his books is take really complicated or ethereal ideas and make them really vivid through his understanding of stories and history. And that's what I was trying to do with the Stoics. And I sort of stumbled into this formula for doing that. And if we think of Stoicism as this philosophy that has endured for thousands of years, not as this thing that I'm responsible for, but as this sort of tradition of being reintroduced to new audiences over and over again, then I just saw it as this, well, yeah, of course I could take what's worked, in these, like Stoicism is invented in Greece, and then it's popular there, and then someone introduces it to Rome, and it's popular there, and then, the Romans introduce it all over the Roman Empire, but then it's rediscovered in the Enlightenment and in the Renaissance, that it comes to America. It's this kind of perpetually rediscovered thing. And so seeing it as that made me I was still scared. I mean, I'm still 25 years old writing this book about this thing that I don't have a degree in and that I wasn't sure there was an audience in, but I had this sense like, hey, I'm just trying this thing that's happened a lot of times, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. And it turned out that it did. But that's also allowed me, but by taking that lesson from it, it's just allowed me to be more experimental and try different things in my life and go, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Let me ask you about practical applications, right?
Okay.
Because we were talking backstage earlier about how you find so many elements of Stoicism in religion, in religious faith, right? Obviously, Buddhism and Christianity, Judaism, Islam. We were talking about it in Judaism, this notion that religious Jews wake up every day and they thank God for giving me breath again.
Yeah.
This idea of gratitude. It's very common in all religious traditions, but from a sort of a practical perspective, I mean, you write about things like get up and do something hard every morning, right? So exercise, or go to bed early, or show up every day and do the work. Wait to react.
Yeah.
I love that one. Practice ignoring things. Focus. Forgive yourself. Walk me through how you go through your day, applying these principles and reminding yourself because it's a discipline.
Yeah.
And like everybody here, all of us, we have shitty days. We fail. We have days where we disappoint ourselves, where we do react, where we don't practice restraint, where we wish we would have reacted a different way. So how do you, on a daily basis, practice these things, and what do you do when you fail to practice them?
I'm a big believer in routine. I like to have structure. These are the things that I do every day. This is the order I like to do them in every day. I will say, having kids, it's much more these are the things I like to do. I'll try to do them in the course of the day, as opposed to my previous life where it was like, this is the time I do these things because I decide, right? Undeniable reality comes in and says, oh, those were your plans. We'll see about that. But I try to think about what are the core practices or occurrences that make up a good day. I think a lot of people think about well, what do I want to do in the future? What is success? I just go what do I like my days to look like? And if I have a sense of that, then I know whether I'm doing the right things or the wrong things. And for me, that's usually time to write, time with my family, good amount of sleep, eating well.
Do you block schedule your day? Do you have a very specific schedule every single day?
My dream day is a blank calendar. So nothing's scheduled.
And you would wake up and you would structure it from at the beginning of the day?
In the sense that like what I don't like when something's in my calendar that is a scheduled interruption from the ideal day. So if I have a doctor's appointment, if I have a phone call, if I have a plane to catch, that is me having ceded control of that day or my life to some other thing, which is a reality.
That's going to happen
Of
multiple
course.
times a week. I mean, you run a
Yes.
business and you've got multiple books and you've got videos and you've got a bookstore and people want to talk to you about projects. So, and you want to write and you want to journal and you want to focus on reading and do the other things you need in exercise.
But when I think of the schedule, I think of stuff taking me away from that.
Right.
So it's like if I have a breakfast meeting at 10, that means I'm not getting up, taking the kids to school, sitting down and writing, right? Because everything's now pivoted around this thing that I've allowed to interrupt that time. So I protect that sort of white space. And the white space is not, well, what am I going to do today? The white space is I know what I'm supposed to be doing every day. And then occasionally there are scheduled interruptions. I enjoy some of them. I don't like some of others. But I try to sort of have my general rhythm of like what I like my days in life to look like, and I build around that. And then so when things come my way, and this if someone's like, hey, do you want to do this thing, but it's going to involve 6 days in New York City, I go, well, that it might be lucrative, it might be cool, it might be a thing that everyone else in my position would choose. But the no answer is clear to me because it's actually taking me away from what I want my life to look like. But to go to your question about routine or structure, like what I like in a day, I think some big bucket things are like wake up early, don't do the phone first thing, right? Don't get sucked into email, social media, texts, like my rule is like don't touch the phone for first hour you're awake, right? A good morning, like if things are going my way, weather permitting, like I take my kids and I go for a walk. Also, they used to be strap-inable, to strollers and things. Now it's a negotiation.
Yeah.
And so again, that's like, does it go? Can I convince them? Can I not convince them? What time did they wake up? But we go for the walk, take them to school, or whatever we have to do, and then ideally by a very early time, I am sitting at my desk and I'm doing the creative task for the day. I think a couple months ago, I had a talk and was driving back, and I got to the office at like 2. And I really had to do writing, and I sat down to write at like 2. And it was actually really great, talking about the obstacles way. It was this perfect reminder of like, this is why I don't start my day at 2. Like what I sat down to do at 2, who I was at 2 p.m. versus who I am at 8:30 a.m. It was like they might as well have been different writers. It just wasn't there. The focus wasn't there. The discipline wasn't there. The quality wasn't there, because who I was, having elapsed that many hours, that much time on the phone, eaten, not eaten, I just wasn't who I needed to be. So that's kind of how I think about the first half of the early part of the day. I feel like if you nail the morning, it's downhill from there. Yeah, in a positive
uphill,
way.
Down easy.
Well, you're on like you're coasting. You're coasting.
You're skiing. It's a downhill slope.
Yes.
It's a pleasant rest of the day.
Yes.
How do you think about temperance in your life? Because obviously we're not talking about like the temperance movement, but discipline and restraint. And there are elements of what you eat or what you don't eat, or how you choose to cut things out of your life, whether it's what you take into your body or what you expose yourself to. So what does temperance mean for you?
I will say, so I went to my publisher, I was like, I want to write about Stoicism. They're like, ugh, and then, those books did well. And then I was like, now I want to write about temperance. And they were like, ugh, but I actually take that seriously. Like whenever I feel like, let's say I'm really interested in a thing or a subject, I think this is a problem people have. They're really into it, and they're so into it that you lose the ability to understand that most people are not only not into it, they're like, ugh, right? And I think one thing I'm pretty good at is figuring out how to take whatever excites me about a thing and make it interesting to people. So for Ego is the Enemy, I wanted to write a book about humility. And nobody wants to read a book about humility. It's not interesting. There's no inspiring stories of humility. By definition, humility is not inspiring. It's like you were saying, people say they want to hear stories of failures, but they actually don't.
No, they don't.
Why don't they?
Because nobody would listen to that podcast. I get asked all the time, when are you going to do stories of failure? And I say, we talk about failure in every episode multiple times, but ultimately you've got a limited amount of time in your day, right?
Yes.
And so,
when I decided I wanted to write this book about humility, I had to go, well, people are like, no, they think they want to read about humility, but they don't. And I looked at the sales of some books that had been about humility. They'd not done well, but I felt like it was important. So ego is the opposite of humility. So I wrote a book about against the opposite of the thing that I wanted to talk about, right? And for temperance, it's like temperance, the idea of moderation or restraint, that's not exciting. I mean, just the word temperance, first off, not only is like a lot of people don't know what it means, people who do know what it means, in America, the temperance movement is the worst, not the worst, one of the worst, one of the least fun political movements in American history, right?
Yeah.
Temperance movement is what passes prohibition.
Yep.
People shouldn't be allowed to drink, so we're going to take away their fun and their choice. So to write about temperance, which is how it is typically rendered in the 4 cardinal virtues of Stoicism: courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. How do you make that interesting? And so I zeroed in on discipline, which most people agree is important. So I feel like if I have one superpower, it's I am able to figure out what the interesting way is into that topic. And I think people think temperance is not exciting, but discipline is something we all want to cultivate. And
yeah, no, I mean, to your point, I mean, so there are people like my wife who is incredibly self-disciplined. She can do things on her own, and I need to be held accountable. So I exercise every day, but I meet up with somebody online or in person because that keeps me accountable. It's why Strava works as an app, because people are accountable to the other people waiting for them. And that's been proven to be a useful way, but I couldn't do it on my own. I don't believe I could. It's just not in me. But do you think that, how do you cultivate discipline, especially if you don't feel like you are naturally inclined?
But see, I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. So sure, there's some people who they love exercise, so they exercise. And that requires, I would actually argue, less discipline than someone who's like, I won't exercise on my own, so I'm going to create a mechanism or make a commitment that makes me more able to do the thing, right? So I think so often we mistake what people are sort of naturally interested in or good at or getting rewarded for as being a function of their discipline, when actually maybe their discipline, Tom Brady does not need discipline to play football. He needs discipline to know when it's time to not play football.
Yeah, right.
And we're all like that. We have the things that are easy for us and the things that are hard for us. And I would define discipline as the ability to do the things that are hard for us, even though we don't want to, even though we're not seeing the immediate rewards or gratification for that thing. So, I tried to expand the definition of discipline. Discipline is not the sheer force of will that makes you do something. Discipline is the temperament or the strategies or the systems that one comes up with to get to the place that they want to be. And I think that's why, I opened Discipline's Destiny with the story of Lou Gehrig, who, has the longest streak in the history of baseball until it's broken by Cal Ripken. It's like 2,130 games, and that's like really impressive, right? But then I was like, what's more impressive? Showing up to work every day for 70 years, the way Queen Elizabeth II did. And that that's the same thing, but just in different domains. And so one is a sort of athletic discipline, and the other is a discipline of temperament. Her job is in what she's not allowed to do and what she doesn't do. And so I think I think sometimes we go, oh, I'm not a disciplined person because we're comparing ourselves against someone that is really disciplined in something or perhaps just really good at something. And we don't actually look and give ourselves credit for all the ways that we're actually quite disciplined and then sort of build on that strength.
I want to kind of shift gears for a moment. And by the way, we will take questions. So please
Love it.
gear up your questions because I'm sure that many of you will have some great questions. But I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about Robert Greene because his work has also been obviously profoundly influential and it has influenced you, many people in this audience. I have been influenced by his work in part because I think like many people probably here or listening, I've always been turned off by the notion of power and scared of this idea of what that means because I have certain connotations around what it means. Recently, I've been listening to a series on the Russian Revolution by Mike Duncan. He did, I'm sure some of you know, he did amazing podcasts. What a gift he's given to the world.
Incredible.
With all of these different series on revolutions. I'm on like episode 40 of the Russian Revolution. We haven't even reached Lenin. It's like 200 episodes of this thing, right? But I was listening to it in the context of thinking about Robert Greene, and it's so clear that all revolutionary movements, all social justice movements, all movements that are ostensibly designed to change the political order are ultimately about power, about supplanting those in power and then
it's about the
grasping.
acquisition and then the utilization of power because there's no change or progress without the ability to do that or to effectuate what you want.
So knowing you were Robert's research assistant and you know his work very, very well, what is it about power that most people fail to understand at their peril?
There's a line in Meditations where Marcus Aurelius says, I think he's encapsulating the essence of Robert's work. He says, don't go around expecting Plato's Republic, right? He's saying that the world is what it is. It can be made better, but you have to start with where it is, as it is, as Saul Alinsky famously said. You have to sort of see the world clearly. You have to live in reality. But the problem is reality is unpleasant. Reality is dark. I think it's interesting that Robert gets this sort of reputation as being awful or evil or dark. He's not even in the books, right? Like Robert is this. I think it encapsulates something about human nature, which he also talks about in the Laws of Human Nature, which is that instead of accepting or realizing that things are the way that they are, we'd rather deny, blame certain people for them, pretend they don't exist. It's more pleasant to pretend you live in Plato's Republic than to, as another line from Cicero about Cato goes, he's talking about Cato, he says, Cato believed he lived in Plato's Republic instead of in the dregs of Romulus. And he was saying that Cato was ultimately an ineffectual politician because he lived in fantasy worlds, his moral universe, which was right and pure and good, and not the rickety, corrupt, strange republic that he lived in. And I think we have what I've always taken from Robert's books, and where I think they're so important, is that Robert isn't saying that he likes that the world is this way, that he thinks the world should be this way, that he thinks you should act like, insert one of the villains in his books. But he is saying you have to understand that these people exist, that like gravity or any other force of physics, these things exist. This is what human nature and people tend to do in the same situations over and over and over again. And you ignore this, you live in Plato's Republic at your peril, right? And when you accept reality on its terms, that doesn't mean you write human beings off and you try to not make a positive difference, but it does allow you to act, you have your feet on the ground and you're more likely to make something happen. So what I've always told people is like, if you find the thought of Robert's books repellent, or you have strong preconceived notions about what's in the books before you've read them, you're precisely who should read the books. That you need it more than the other person. And if you're one of the people who loves the books and you live and breathe that's like maybe a little, you should make sure you're not a psychopath.
Yeah.
I just think, we have to, like, no one has ever achieved any progress or brought about any moral good, or, pulled the moral arc of the universe in the right direction without power. Power isn't always elected office. Power is understanding media. Power is understanding, the mob. Power is many things, but you cannot bring about change or improve the world or do things without some form of power.
And you can draw, what I love about his work is that you can draw many, many different conclusions. And I think that's probably why he's controversial, because the conclusions that some people draw are that, well, this is evil. I think we were talking about this earlier, but his books are like the most popular books in prisons.
Yes. They're also some of the most stolen books in the country. And they're actually banned. Yeah, they're banned in some federal prisons because it's just, I guess if you're a prison warden, you don't want someone using these tools against you, which makes it makes sense. But I think that's also a testament to the power inside these books, and then you choose how you use them. And I think Robert, to me, is their first law of power is never outshine the master, right? And his point is that people are fundamentally jealous and insecure, and they don't want other people to succeed, and they're always checking out our relative status. And then, like, to me, it says something very powerful about Robert's character as a person, that he has been a tireless advocate and friend to me in my own career. Like, that is a law I've never seen Robert enforce, right? And I think anyone that's met Robert has sometimes trouble reconciling the books and the person, which is, I think, fundamentally the genius of the books, which is you understand them and then you decide who you are going to be as a person. You're going to decide which of the weapons to use or not use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many. I mean, it's like, in some ways, what he writes is sort of the source, maybe not the source code, but like the philosophical underpinnings of the reality that we all live in. And you write sort of ways to cope with it, in a sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and here's what I would say about Robert's books. If you're not reading them, if you don't understand and have the tools to use power, the person that you're going up against, or the cause that you're going up against, or the people who want to keep things the way that they are or hold people back, those people, they have read them, or they understand these ideas at an intuitive level that will stun you. And so the idea that you're going to cede the field to these groups or these people strikes me as, again, very naive and very irresponsible fundamentally, right? Sure, I guess if you want to pretend you live in Plato's Republic, you can, but you don't. You have to figure out how to succeed and bring about change and be good and be on the right side of things in, America in the 21st century. And, that's going to require some pragmatism and realism and compromise. And you got to have the fortitude to be able to do that.
Why don't we take some questions? And while we line up, I think there's going to be a microphone. There should be a microphone in the center aisle, or let's see where I can't see anything here, but there is a microphone somewhere.
Yep,
and
center aisle.
others. Okay, and you can start to line up behind that mic if you have a question for Ryan. While we're waiting, I want to ask you about Marcus Aurelius.
Okay.
So Marcus Aurelius, what would he make of? First of all, my sense from your descriptions of him is that he probably would have valued courtesy and kindness, I think, even though he was a Roman leader and he was probably brutal and vicious. But I think maybe interpersonally, he would have valued those qualities and characteristics. We're living at a time where, things like kindness and courteousness are seen as like indulgences
Yeah.
and unnecessary. And I have to admit, I'm distressed by that because I think that I want to live in a world where people are courteous and kind. And I wonder what he would say about
I think that's so powerful because, just like Robert's books, the purpose of Stoicism is not to make you a better sociopath, right? It's not. It's supposed to make you a better person, right? Courage, discipline, justice, and wisdom, right? Justice is not like this extra one that's thrown in there. It's like, it's love thy neighbor love thy neighbor as thyself. It's a core tenet of the religion. You can't just, toss it out because it's hard or you don't like it. There's this beautiful line in the beginning of meditation. So meditations, we don't know how it was organized when he wrote it. Maybe it's exactly as we got it, or maybe someone put it all in an order that they liked. But the first book in meditations, almost 10% of the book, is called Debts and Lessons. And it's all the things that Marcus learned from people in his life. And it's really remarkable to think that, again, he wasn't publishing it. So the Debts and Lessons, this is a personal balance sheet that he's keeping. And it's so beautiful what he says that he learned from all these people and how effusive he is in their praise, in his praise for them, even though they didn't know he was writing this. But he learns from just as Sextus the philosopher. And he says, one of the things he learned, he says, the key is to be free of passion, so free of like strong emotions, says, but full of love. And that's not the image that we have of the Stoics, right? We have the Stoics as being free of passion, but we forget this extra part, which is full of love. And then towards the end of meditations, he talks about being strict with yourself, but tolerant of others. And so I think we get these snapshots or these slices of Marcus as a remarkably patient person, a loving person who cared about common good and humanity as a whole. And sure, yes, Rome was a violent, barbaric. Like they called the strangers the barbarians, but they were barbaric in every sense of the word. And Marcus, would have participated in this and more or less given the green light. But we do get the sense that, as you said, when he had a choice, when it was him and another person, he tried to be kind and cared about them and thought about, the Stoics say like, you can't take offense, right? Like, try to not get offended by other people. But I don't think Marcus was going around saying politically incorrect things, not giving a shit about how other people thought. I don't think that's Marcus. So yeah,
he was not a troll.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Gotcha. All right, we've got a long line.
Wow.
So I'm going to try to be disciplined and ask folks to keep it as concise as possible.
No two-parters.
No two-parters. So thank you, please.
So thank you so much for joining us tonight in San Francisco. Huge fan, Ryan, and same with you, Guy. So my question for you, Ryan, is I know you know the 48 laws of power inside and out, backwards. What would you say the law is that resonates with you the most today, 2023?
The final law is assume formlessness, which is basically throw out all the other laws, which I think is the genius book, the genius part of that book, which is, 48 laws of power isn't do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. Some people will say to Robert, well, law this and this one contradict each other. And they only contradict each other if you don't read all the way to the end and get to the last part, right? Philosophy and life is about paradoxes. Sometimes you do this, sometimes you do the opposite of this. And they're both true and they're both the right things to do. And so to me, I think the idea of formlessness, the enemy of, or the opposite, the antithesis of wisdom and power and success and discipline is rigidity. Right? This is the way it should be. This is who I am. This is how I am. Formlessness being, I think, the apotheosis of that book. And ultimately what you're supposed to take from it is the ability to be flexible and adapt and adjust, apply this law this time, the opposite of that law at other times. And that's why also people miss this. Every law has something at the end, and it is the reversal of the law.
Yeah. It reminds me of Bruce Lee's famous line, "Be like water."
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, Ryan.
Hi.
How do you view relational situations where one partner is actively practicing Stoicism and the other isn't? I mean, for example, I'm here by myself.
That says it all. No, I get it. Look, I think one of the things that happens whenever one finds something that works or that fascinates them or change is you want to get other people to do it, and you want to get that. And it's wonderful to share. Stoicism is not like an evangelical religion. They're not going to hell if they don't get it.
Yeah.
But I just tend to just try to focus. And any couples counselor will tell you this is like, your partner's your partner. They do what they're going to do. If you want them to change, start with yourself. And so I just try to focus on that, and I try to remember that it's probably my fault anyway. I'm probably contributing to the thing plenty, and so I'm gonna focus on that. Yes, sometimes there's gonna be unreconcilable differences. There's gonna be totally different worldviews, and those worldviews just cannot be in the same house. But I think for the most part, we try to focus on ourselves, and there is some beautiful history between, say, like Marcus Aurelius and his brother, his adopted stepbrother, Lucius Verus, who's the opposite. But what Marcus says in Debts and Lessons, he goes, what I loved about my brother, who from what we know was like sort of not the best, he goes, I loved how his character helped me improve my own.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Ryan.
Hello.
I'm a little short here. As a person who's found a lot of healing and recovery in the 12-step rooms, I was very surprised to see you write about it in both Stillness is the Key and Discipline is Destiny. So I'm curious as to like how that came about or why you were inspired to do that. Because the only other one I found was Russell Brand's Recovery.
Yeah.
So,
I would say I'm like recovery adjacent. I certainly I relate to all the impulses and the problems. I've just thankfully never ended up that far, right? And I would actually credit Stoicism with that, sort of discovering it early. Like, there's not a thing that I cannot get addicted to. And sort of being very aware of that, I sort of have been very interested in how those groups function, what they teach, how they work. What are the sort of general lessons that apply to all of us? And I mean, the Serenity Prayer is about as good of encapsulation as you can get to Stoicism as there is. And what I think is so fascinating, when do you think the Serenity Prayer was created? Put a year on it.
There's a different version of it that it hits even harder. It's like, higher power grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know that one is me. Like when I heard that one, I was like, oh, that's Stoicism.
Totally. It feels like this thing that's always been with us, and it was jotted off like in the 1950s. And you just go, wow, okay. There's always new ways to repackage and define these very old, timeless ideas. And so, yeah, that's where that comes from for me.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
It's very
Keep
inspiring
working
for
it.
that to be out there too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Ryan. Hi,
Hi.
Guy. I actually brought your book too, so if you sign later.
All right.
My question kind of go back to the question Guy asked you earlier about if you had a bad day, what are the tools that you like gravitate towards to solve that? Because myself, I pretty much, it is what it is, mind over matter type of person, but then bad days still affect you. a lot.
Yes.
At the end of the week, you get exhausted. So how do you go back and reset yourself?
I'd love to hear your answer. And
I have never had a bad day that was made worse by exercising. So whenever I'm like having a shitty day, it's going sideways, I'm struggling with something, I go for a run, or I go for a swim, or I ride my bike, or at the very least, I just like go for a walk. It doesn't magically solve the problem, but it changes who I am in relation to that problem. It turns down the volume on that thing. So, you know, usually like when I'm having a bad day or I'm struggling with something, it's because like things are not going right or I'm not doing things right, right? And so I find that it's hard for me to screw up working out, right? Pushing myself. Like I leave my house to go for a run, I come back, you know? I say I'm gonna go to the gym for an hour, like I'm there, right? And so I have found that like that is like, you know, in meditation you have like a mantra, like a thing you return to that kind of brings you back to center. That's always been that for me, is I want to do that. And so I schedule it in the day where I intend to do it every day. But sometimes I'm like, okay, we're moving this up. You know, this needs to happen now. And I, again, it doesn't magically erase everything, but it does tend to it brings me to a better place to then deal with that thing. And then, yeah, as you said, let's say a crappy day is a crappy week. But then I look back on the week and I go, oh, you know, I worked out every day this week. I go, well, it wasn't terrible. You know, it wasn't a complete waste. I didn't completely fall apart. I did some good thing every day. I had something to show for showing up every day.
Yeah, there is such a clear connection between physical activity and its impact, obviously, on our mental health. And it's not always easy, and bad days happen even when we do that. But that has an enormous impact. You may be familiar with David Steindl-Rast, who is a priest, Father David Steindl-Rast, and he he's written a book, and he gave a beautiful TED Talk many years ago, and he said, every single day is a new beginning. And I love that concept. And of course, we can't always think that way, but it's a really sort of grounding notion idea that we're sort of gifted another chance every 24 hours. And I love that idea. It doesn't obviously solve everything, but sometimes it has like a micro mitigation effect on those really rough days.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a big fan, Ryan. So my question is, earlier you were talking about how your publishers were iffy about your idea on Stoicism. So how did you overcome that fear, and why did you decide to do it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think you can always tell yourself is, well, let's sketch out the worst case scenario here, right? You have this idea for a book, and you send it to your publisher, and they say no, right? That's the worst case scenario, right? And it's not that bad. Worst case scenario is I have to publish it myself. The worst case scenario is I try again later, right? Like it was not, the downside was very low and the upside was high. Now, I kind of got sometimes you get a clear yes or a clear no. I got what they sometimes call in publishing like a kiss-off advance, which is like, what can we offer you that's like, maybe they'll say no, right? You know, as I asked my editor many years later, I said, what were you hoping I would say? And they said, we were hoping maybe you do this book, get it out of your system, and then go back to writing marketing books, which thankfully didn't happen. But realizing that there wasn't a sort of, they weren't telling me yes or no. They were just telling me like, we're not super excited about it. And so I had to create my own excitement, my own driving. And then I do think it also helped. Managing expectations is always great, right? So they didn't think it would be huge. I didn't think it would be huge. When it came out, it wasn't huge. I think it sold 3,500 copies its first week, which wasn't enough to hit a bestseller list. And it wasn't a conclusive failure or success. And so it just kind of did what it did. And then I went to work on the next thing. So sometimes, when we're thinking like, oh, it must be really scary to do it, it's more like just indifference, that you're really up against, which is not that much of an opponent. Like indifference, I mean, welcome to life. Most people are indifferent to most people and things. And so just realizing it wasn't this thing I had to sweat, it's just the thing I would try. And that's where I took it.
All right, thank you.
How you guys doing? First, I want to say that I think I can speak for almost everyone in this room that your books have changed my life and people in this room. But I wanted to ask you, I think there's a quote by Marcus Aurelius along the lines of, "No person crosses the same river twice." What Stoic philosophy, what Stoic ideas have you came across once and then had a totally different opinion on later?
So that's actually from Heraclitus, who Marcus Aurelius quotes a bunch of meditations, and the idea is, we're not only do we not step in the same river twice because the river's changing, but we're also changing. The idea being that, sure, meditations is 2,000 years old, but and has remained unchanged for 2,000 years, and yet each successive generation takes something new or different from it. And we were talking about this at dinner, like what I took from meditations when I was 19 versus what I took from it yesterday, these are different things. But, understanding meditations as effectively a plague book, a book written during a plague, is a totally different lens on Marcus and Stoicism and the message of the book that I think would have been impossible for me growing up where I've grown up and how life has been in America since I've read meditations up until 3 years ago exactly, right? When COVID happens and you are forced to, you are come face to face with things that are happening and behaviors people are doing that would have been intimately familiar to Marcus and were driving and changing what he was writing about. Suddenly you understand him and it and yourself in a new way. And so it is important, I think, and this is one of the ideas behind the Daily Stoic, so you don't just read a thing once, but you come back to it over and over again and you read it. I think when I look at your book, I think of that, like the beginning entrepreneur reading your book is going to get something very different than that same entrepreneur reading that same book as a the founder or owner of a late stage company, because a whole bunch of stuff went over their head because they didn't even know what they didn't know about this. They weren't interested in some lesson from a late stage founder because that was incomprehensible from their position.
And I think you can apply that same principle to music and to novels and to other pieces of art that we're exposed to at different times in our life and how it impacts us depending on the context, the contextual, perspective. You mentioned this idea earlier, and I didn't know it. It is remarkable that when Marcus Aurelius is writing meditations, the thing that everybody around him is talking about all the time is a plague.
Yes.
For most of that time,
it's 15 years.
That's what's dominating people's brains.
And he probably dies of it. He probably dies of it. And realizing that, this was the seminal event of his life. And so it's remarkable, one, that, we miss this, but also that he doesn't talk about it that much because he's focused interior. It's very strange.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Ryan. I'm a big fan of yours. Guy, love the podcast. So, Ryan, my question for you is, and they're all great books, don't get me wrong, but if you had to go back and rewrite one, which one would it be and why?
Right, to rewrite one. I'd probably rewrite Trust Me, I'm Lying, just because I wrote that when I was so young, and also I've seen the legacy that book has gone.
Did you leave some good stuff out of that? You did?
Or maybe I wouldn't publish it at all. But I don't know. I've also had the pleasure / horror of doing new editions of a book that I wrote when I was 24, which is not an experience I would wish on anyone. Speaking of never stepping in the same river twice, like when you write a book or you work on a thing, that's who you are, and that's what you think to be true. And there's this part of you that doesn't think. You are putting this down for all. You are cementing this in place in time. If you could change it, if you knew what you would know in the future, you would do things differently, but you don't. That's the tragedy of the human experience.
And sorry, just quickly, do you have any update on Robert's new book? Because I can't ask him.
It's in the works as always. He's always working on it.
Have you had a sneak peek?
I've read pieces of it. It's very, very good. Like some of the sections in Robert's books are almost as long as my entire book. So we're operating very different universes.
Hey, Ryan.
Hi.
I'll keep it brief.
Okay.
What's one piece of advice you know now that you wish you could tell your younger self when you started off your writing career?
Great question.
Yes. It's going to take longer than you think. It's going to take longer than you think. There's a great law. It's like it always takes longer than you expect, even when you take this law into account. It's going to take longer than you think. The Obstacles Away came out in, I think it took 6 years to hit a bestseller list, something like that. If you had told me that when I put it out, I'm not sure I would have accepted that or how that would have landed with me, but it takes longer. It takes longer to get good at it. It takes longer for people to discover the stuff. It takes way longer than whatever time frame you're capable of at that time. That's what I'd say.
How old are you, by the way, if you don't mind?
21.
21. I'm 48. I'm going to give you the piece of advice I would have given myself when I was 21, which is a version of dance like no one's watching, which is don't limit yourself. Try things. Put yourself out there. Be open to new experiences. And don't ever be too cool to do something, because that's going to...
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
First off, I love this shirt.
Thank you.
So my question is, do you think the practice of Stoicism is more a matter of the mind or of the heart? Insofar as like, what would you say to a student of Stoicism when they encounter more emotionally charged matters, like heartbreak, loss of a friend, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think the most beautiful writing that Seneca did, he wrote these 4 essays that are called his Consolations. And they're him consoling people who have lost someone. In one case, it's his mother who lost him. He's been exiled. And so I think this idea of the Stoics is having no emotions, being emotionless, having no heart, it totally misses it. It's about not being overwhelmed and ruled by or destroyed by those emotions, but it's certainly not stuffing them down and pretending they don't exist. So, sometimes it's about using the mind to work through and understand, here's why you're feeling this way. This way is not rational. This isn't a good way to feel. And then I think in other times, you've got it all perfectly worked out in your head, and the heart needs to come and overwhelm that and be like, it's more complicated. There are people involved. So I think it's like we're talking about with formlessness. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So whatever I've learned about Ryan is like about 19-year-old cool kid came across this Stoicism and just made it his life on it.
I don't think anyone would have said cool kid, but okay.
So how was Ryan before he turned 19, and how it influenced all his journey from that point, and what really happened at that point in life that just turned everything around?
Well, I wish Robert was here because he could give you. He knew me then, so he could give you an answer. I was reading. So I got Marcus Aurelius when I was in college. So I was reading it in my college apartment, and I guess that I'm reading some obscure school of ancient philosophy by myself in my college apartment. Goes to the not cool kid idea for sure. I don't know. I think what struck me about the Stoics was what I was really looking for, which I think a lot of young men and women are looking for today, but have always looked for throughout history, which is like, how am I supposed to be? What should I do? What should I not do? I was looking for what I think ancient philosophy is at its best, which is a guide to the good life. And that's what I have tried to articulate and explain in my books, is to take that guide and make it as accessible and interesting and practical as I as I can for people.
I would add that knowing about a little bit about your life, that you were a reader. You grew up as a reader in a family of readers, and reading also exposed you to infinite number of ideas, and that gave you this opportunity to be exposed to this book that you may not otherwise have been exposed to.
Totally, that was the question I like to ask. What should I read? What should I read?
Yeah.
What should I read? And I asked the question enough times that I found the book I should be reading.
And that's a discipline or practice that people can choose.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, 2 more. We got to just do 2 more, guys.
Hi, Ryan. Hi, Guy. So I have a quote by Confucius. It's one of my favorites. It goes, "To keep the old warm and to provide understanding of the new is to call yourself a teacher." And you and Robert and Guy, it reminds me of that every time I read it.
Thank you.
You've inspired me to be a teacher, and I want to do the same. Keep that chain going throughout history. We just hand it down to the next generation. What's your one tip to be an effective teacher and to keep the old warm? As when I'm a teacher, I'm a little bit talking down to people. So
I think what I learned, I'll give you what I learned from Robert, which is that you show, you don't tell. So the reason Robert writes in stories is the same reason that Jesus spoke in parables. It's the same reason Lincoln told stories, which is that it is the most disarming and effective and interesting way to deliver information to people. And I think, you do this in the podcast. You get people to tell their stories. You don't have, here's the 16 tips. You go listen to this story, and then people take things out of it. And I think listening to stories and telling stories is the oldest and most effective way to deliver information. And for some reason, it remains the least utilized. And that's what I try to do in my books, and that's what I think all the things I like all have in common, so they're great stories.
I think the best teachers never cease to be students. It sounds like a cliche, but it's true. I teach younger people about the craft of what I do, but I'm also learning from them all the time and learning from other sources, trying to get better at what I do, because that makes me better as a transmitter of information. So that would be my advice. Never cease to be a student.
thank you. I'll put those both into action. Thank you.
All right.
All right, last one.
Last one, guys. I'm sorry.
One
more.
Yes.
One more,
That's
yeah.
what he said.
So considering, first, Ryan, obstacles of the way changed my life. Thank you. Considering trusting me online, the media landscape, what can we do? It's just driving me nuts. We're believing lies, or half the population is.
Yeah, I would say everything I was talking about in that book is worse in most ways. But what I think, the couple things that I think are interesting or encouraging to me, I think we live now in a sort of a subscription economy where people actually subscribe to things, which is one of the main things I was talking about in the book. The sort of disintermediation of media is what created the sort of endless war for attention and clickbait and all that. And then I think, podcasting as a medium, which was really not much of a thing in 2011 when I was writing the book, when you sit down and you listen to someone's story for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, or you record for 2.5 hours and edit it down to an hour, like a long form conversational exploration, there's something I think very powerful about podcasts that are the opposite of most of the negative trends of today's media, which is shortness, virality, simplicity, not, dehumanizing people. I think podcasts tilt us somewhat back in the right direction, and I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Before we go, one last question I have.
Just Sam. He's forging up permission.
Okay.
Oh, great. All right.
We got it.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hi.
In our, I'll make this quick, I swear. In our increasingly weakening and over-emotional societies, what are the best Stoic practices to avoid getting sucked into Twitter wars and other things that are constantly vying for our attention through, news is just one big, especially our government uses fear and other emotions to control populations. And what are the best practices to avoid getting suckered into
Are you sure you're 14?
Yes. I swear.
No, it's a great question. I think first off, just being aware that this thing is not your friend necessarily. That I think having kind of an adversarial relationship with the overwhelming amount of information that's out there, that you don't have to consume it all. I just try to go towards sources of information that are perennial. So I think books. I think you can learn lots of new things from very old books, right? And chances are, if they've been relevant or true for 1,000 years, there's chance it's going to be relevant for at least a few more. And so I think, deciding that where you're going to get the bulk of your information, or what's the primary lens by which you're going to come to understand the world, and choosing to do that through more perennial sources as opposed to the latest breaking real time is just a choice you have to make as an individual, and that's the choice that I make. Great question.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Ryan, before we go, one last question for you, which is, what is something that everybody in this crowd, everybody listening, could do? One simple thing they could do today or tomorrow to make their life just a little bit better.
Going to what we were just talking about with media and information, I would say a real easy one: don't sleep with your phone in your bedroom. Leave it in the kitchen, in the other room, whatever. Don't charge it next to your bed. Don't let it be the last thing that you touch or look at before you go to sleep. And by definition, it won't be the first thing that you touch when you wake up. And so creating some very hard, if not artificial, boundaries between you and the kinds of craziness and chaos and all of that is one of the best decisions that I've ever made.
I'm going to add one thing to that.
Okay.
The first thing you should do every morning is drink a big glass of water. I promise you, it's going to have a massive impact on your day. All right, with that, I wanted to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for saving us.
It's been so fun. Ryan Holiday, everybody.
Thank you.
I hope you like this video. I hope you subscribe. But what I really want you to subscribe to is our daily Stoic email. One bit of Stoic wisdom, totally for free, to the largest community of Stoics ever in existence. You can sign up at dailystoic.com/email. There's no spam. You can unsubscribe at any time. I love sending it. I've sent it every day for the last 6 years, and I hope to see you there at dailystoic.com/email.